Have some members that are coming in off the floor. Much appreciated. I'd like to start by reminding you to turn off your electronic devices or put them on vibrate, please. And I would like to thank Donley, Donovan, and Murray for the lunches today, and Representative Francis, the Vice Chairman, for getting those lunches. Thank you. Much appreciated. Committee, we're going to change up the agenda just a little bit, and we're going to go ahead with the 911 overview that we asked to come back. Would you mind, I think we have about 10 minutes for that, if you wouldn't give us a brief overview, and then we'll allow for questions, if you would. Thank you.
Thank you. Returning to finish up the presentation on the NG 911 report. As you remember, I think there are 3 statutory objectives for that audit. The first one is to determine and assess the status of the NG 911 platform in the state of Kansas. Definitionally, NG 911 is the internet version of the previous telephony-based 911 system. And at this point, all 117 PSAPs in Kansas outside the Mid-America region have elected and connected to the statewide platform. So on page 7 of the executive summary, you'll see that the statewide map looks like this. The platform was built using a vendor selected by RFP beginning in 2015. There is a pending matter with the FCC that's going to affect future deployment, and that is the FCC notice of proposed rulemaking on requiring telephone companies on request to provide an internet protocol connection for their exchange into the system. Significant grant funding is being considered by Congress, and so there is prospect of that. This is a rather expensive venture, and that grant funding is going to be instrumental for expansion and adding future and additional features to the system. So we concluded that Kansas, in fact, is well positioned and well funded for the future. Kansas, the NG 911 system is highly regarded nationally by the state and federal trade associations in this field. I would point out that NG 911 system is a technology platform, and it's kind of what you get with technology. The platforms are never really truly complete. Every PSAP in the state is connected, but there is a big effort underway continuously to upgrade and enhance the platform. The statutory objective, audit objective number 2, was to assess whether the fee funds provided by the 90 cents per month per subscriber account are used appropriately per the statute. There are 8 allowed uses under the Kansas 911 Act. In particular, you can summarize that the Act allows spending on a variety of gear necessary to take and complete a 911 call, but excludes spending on 911 personnel, buildings, and radios. The expenditure review is a big task. The council has been doing this for years under the Act and has continuously improved its process, including implementation of a portal for electronic submission of all these expenditures and the documentation. There are 4,600 expenditures that were reviewed, and we concluded that, in fact, the 911 monies have across the board been spent appropriately. The third statutory objective is to assess the adequacy of funding. We found that there are 2 very different perspectives on that. From the council's perspective, the funding is indeed adequate to support, maintain, and upgrade the system, but from the standpoint of PSAPs, the rural PSAPs, there are some real challenges in terms of funding. The council has been able to save some funds since inception. In 2012, the current balance of funds in the account for future expansions is approximately $42 million. That includes the $15 million that the council was given as seed money from the pre-existing task force. So beginning on page 10 of the executive summary, we summarize some issues to consider looking forward. There was some issue with the definition of voting and non-voting categories of members under the act. It seemed a little, there's a little concern that elected members at cities and counties have a non-voting slot on the council. That seemed a little problematic. There's a significant issue potentially with succession planning. The council staff is very small, very dedicated, and there's an issue with who comes next and transfer knowledge and that sort of thing. There's also an issue with cost control. That's just a situation I think you invariably get into with a single prime contractor, that when the rebid happens, how do you ensure that you get a decent price for the rebid? There's also a little bit of a concern with the LCPA structure where you have contractors managing contractors. We outline the concerns on that in the executive summary and the report. There's a concern about PSAP staffing. These are indeed the first responders. As technology changes, so does the workforce needed to support that. Less than half of the PSAPs we surveyed consider themselves to be fully staffed. Consolidation is being considered by many of the rural PSAPs, but there's a bit of a uncertainty in the statute and the act as to how the funding would handle. If one county consolidates with another, for example, does that county still get the $60,000 minimum in the statute today to fund that, their participation in that consolidated entity? And with that, I would answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Committee, any questions? Thank you for the overview. Thank you for coming back. And I do know if that legislation does pass, this could be your last time for a while to be in front of this committee. So be it. Okay.
That's right.
It doesn't break your heart, does it?
No.
Okay.
That's fine.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Committee will turn our attention to the next item of business, the DEI and foreign income report. Thank you, Heidi.
Good afternoon. I'm Heidi Zimmerman. I am here to present the DEI and foreign contribution audit. The audit was requested by Representative Howe. It's a two-question audit. The first question is, how much state funding did each state university report spending on diversity-related departments and staffing in the most recent year? The very short answer to that question. In the 22-23 school year, the 6 state universities reported spending a total of about $9 million in state funding for DEI-related staffing, training, and other services. So for the longer answer, first, neither state law nor the Kansas Board of Regents provides a definition of what activities should be considered DEI-related. So additionally, neither one requires nor prohibits any specific type of DEI activity or spending. Further, the 6 state universities did not have a single shared definition of what DEI activities are. However, their various views did have some common themes. Some universities told us that DEI activities are activities that improve access to higher education for all students. Others told us DEI activities create a university culture that values differences and belonging. And a couple told us that DEI activities help students live and work in a diverse world. We talked to officials from each university about the types of DEI-related services that they provide. We asked them to report the services they thought were DEI-related at their university. And they reported a wide variety of services. Some of those services included food pantries, support groups so that students can meet other students with similar backgrounds or challenges, outreach programs that connect university leaders to traditionally underrepresented student groups, and tutoring. Many DEI services and activities that the universities reported are not targeted to a specific group of students. And most of the universities told us that many services are open to all students. However, universities did report some programs that serve specific student groups. So for example, many universities reported providing services related to military and veteran students, as well as first-generation college students. So to determine how much money universities spent on DEI expenditures, we collected information from the universities. So to collect consistent data across all 6, we asked them to provide expenditures related to any activity or service the university provides to support students who may not have the same opportunities to succeed as other students. We asked the universities to report the personnel, training, and other expenditures they thought met that definition for the 23 school year. Because there is no standard definition of DEI, and there are no reporting or accounting requirements related to it, our ability to detect incorrect or missing information is limited. We did conduct basic data reliability checks. Nevertheless, you should be aware that the accuracy of this information is dependent on whether or not the universities reported completely and accurately to us. Additionally, we cannot ensure complete consistency across the universities because they do not all think of DEI in exactly the same way. So the results of our data collection are on page 6. So in the 23 school year, the 6 universities reported spending a total of about $45 million on DEI-related activities. So the figure on the bottom of page 6 shows the total amount of DEI-related expenditures that each university reported. So within that $45 million are salary and benefits for 510 full-time equivalent DEI-related positions. It also includes costs related to 202 DEI-related trainings for topics such as sexual harassment, anti-bias, and disability inclusion. And last, it includes other costs, such as scholarships, workshops, and events for high school students. So overall, total reported DEI spending, that $45 million, accounted for about 2% of the university's total expenditures in the 23 school year. Additionally, out of the $45 million the university spent on DEI-related activities, they reported spending about $9 million with state funding. So for the $9 million spent with state funds, salary and benefits accounted for 97%. Some of the reported staff included administrative staff, like administrative assistants and directors of various programs, support staff, such as mental health counselors and advisors, student employees, like graduate teaching assistants or interns. Further, not all DEI-related staff are paid 100% with state funds. In many cases, only a portion of the total salary and benefit amount is paid with state funding. Additionally, not all DEI-related staff spend 100% of their time on DEI-related activities. Often, only a portion of a person's time is spent on DEI. Other DEI services accounted for about 2.5% of that $9 million. It's about $220,000. These expenditures included activities such as outreach programs to high school students, transportation services, and software to improve accessibility of students with disabilities. Just like in personnel, many of these expenditures are paid only in part with state funding. Universities reported spending the remaining 0.6%, it's about $55,000, of their state-funded DEI expenditures on DEI-related training. So training paid with state funding included diversity seminars, cultural competency training, and social justice training for advisors. Universities reported holding 19 different types of DEI-related training in the 23 school year that were paid at least in part with state funding. 5 of those 19 DEI-related trainings were mandatory for at least some students, faculty, or staff. Additionally, we found that the universities do not have consistent measures for determining whether DEI-related activities are effective for achieving their DEI goals. Most universities told us their goal for DEI-related activities are to recruit and retain students. all of the universities reported collecting various types of data. The universities then report information such as enrollment and demographics to the Kansas Board of Regents. This allows universities to compare various metrics over time and to other universities. However, currently, the universities cannot directly connect those results to any specific DEI-related activity or spending. I'm going to change gears a little bit and talk about foreign contributions, which is question 2. It starts on page 10. So question 2 is how much in financial contributions and contracts from foreign countries did each university report receiving in the most recent year? So again, the short answer is that the 6 state universities reported receiving about $116 million from foreign sources in the 23 school year. For some details on that, first, federal and state law allow universities to receive money from foreign sources. Federal law defines a foreign source as a foreign government, an individual who is not a U.S. citizen or a U.S. national, a legal entity, such as a business, that's created under the laws of a foreign country, or an agent acting on behalf of a foreign source. We asked all 6 state universities to report all of their contributions they received from a foreign source in the 23 school year. Again, we performed basic reliability checks on the data the universities reported to us to look for accuracy and completeness. But we are reliant on what the universities reported to us. If a university did not report completely, we have limited ability to detect it. The total amount of money that universities reported receiving from foreign sources was about $116 million. Figure 2, which is on page 12, shows the total amount of money each university reported receiving in the 23 school year. As you can see, the total amounts ranged from about $42 million at KU to about $3 million at Emporia State. Nearly all of the money that universities reported receiving from foreign sources was for tuition and fees. So 96% was for tuition and fees. This included the tuition paid for by individual foreign students. It also included foreign universities or governments that paid on behalf of students. About 4%, about $5 million, was for contracts. This included contracts for Kansas universities to perform activities such as aircraft safety assessments, medical research, and animal vaccine research. The last very small amount, 0.1%, it's about $113,000, was for gifts. This included gifts for the university to use for research, scholarships, or to assist students who may not have access to financial aid. The $116 million in contributions from foreign sources made up about 4% of the university's nearly $3 billion in total revenue for the 23 school year. Last, we also looked at where the money came from. So universities reported receiving money from 170 different foreign countries. In total, half of the $116 million was from just 2 countries, India and China. We also looked at which countries contributed the most money by contribution type. So India and China contributed the most tuition and fees. Those 2 countries alone represented 53% of all the tuition and fees. The remainder came from 166 other countries. The United Kingdom and Switzerland paid the most in terms of contracts. Those 2 countries represented about 1/3 of all the money paid through contracts. The remainder came from 37 other countries. And then Canada and Sweden contributed the most in gifts. These 2 countries represented about 2/3 of all gifts. The remainder came from 27 other countries. We did not make any recommendations in this audit. I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Heidi. Committee, any questions? Representative Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So did any of the schools express any concern that maybe some of their DEI policies or practices would be potentially a violation of the Civil Rights Act of Title VI, in which you cannot discriminate against anyone? Or as your report says, they said, most of them said their DEI funds were used for all students. So there was not, was there any discussion of that at all?
We didn't have any discussion of that. They didn't raise any concerns about it, and we didn't ask specifically whether they had concerns along those lines.
Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is just focusing on 1 year. So do we know if there's an increase or has been an increase in that spending in the years prior to the one that you did the audit?
We don't know that. This audit just had us look at 1 year. Because there is no reporting on this, it would be difficult really to say without kind of doing the same work for multiple years.
Multiple years.
Yeah.
If I could, just one more, Madam Chair. And then on page 9, one of the bottom bullet points, it says, other times, training was mandatory for certain students, but not others. Did they divulge why that training was necessary for some and who those students were that required training?
In some cases, we saw that like officers, like student officers and clubs and things were required to do some training. We also saw a time or two where student athletes were required to do some specific training as well. We don't know why those specific groups are singled out, but we do see some variation there.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just one more question. So when we did the community college and we reviewed that, we know that the tuition and fees are considered public funds. For universities in the state of Kansas, I could not find that answer. Do we consider public funds to include tuition and fees? And maybe that's a Tamara question.
I don't know what the statute would say there. We didn't look into it. I know for us, what we asked the universities to do, so when they said, this staff person is DEI related, their whole salary is related to DEI, we asked them to tell us what portion of that was paid for with state funding. So that was the question that we asked. Whether or not they consider tuition and fees part of that, we don't know.
Okay, Tamara, if you want to, okay, thank you. Committee, I did have a couple of questions. One, I would ask, when you were looking at foreign students, did that include foreign students that may have not entered the country legally that are residing in Kansas, or how were they counted and treated? Were they part of this count?
We do know that at least one university reported to us students that they were unclear what their residency was. They did report it in a separate line. We were able to see it. What the other universities did, whether or not they reported that, I don't know. We didn't see in any other university any unknown countries of origin. Pretty much all the money had a country of origin associated with it, so we were able to assign it to a country. We really just had the one university that did have that line where it was just unclear exactly where their residency was.
Okay, thank you. The other question I have is, it's kind of interesting that they're spending funds on the DEI on food pantries and such. So does that mean that you have to meet certain parameters before you can participate in their food? Are they discriminating, basically?
We didn't look at what all the rules were for accessing something like a food pantry. The universities told us that most services were open to all students, but they did also note that some types of students might access certain services more often. So for example, students from a disadvantaged background might access that pantry a little more often than other students. But they didn't tell us that it was closed to anybody.
Thank you. Committee, any other question? Senator Corson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think I believe this is most appropriate for probably staff, and if they could just maybe follow up with the committee afterwards, at your pleasure, Madam Chair. It's been said a couple of times that tuition and fees are public funds. I don't believe that's correct, but I want to see if we could get a statute or a regulation that defines that tuition and fees to a university are considered public funds. Same question with respect to community colleges, because that's been said at our last two meetings, and again, I don't believe that's correct. If I work in a private sector job and I make income, and if I pay the University of Kansas to send my child to the University of Kansas with money that I've earned from my employer, I don't believe that that is considered public funds, if that's a means of tuition. So I just want to get what the relevant set of statutes or rules and regs that define that, if we could. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll have Tamara will look into that also. Representative Williams and then Representative Probst.
Well, I did provide the statute last time. and it was for community colleges. And so I don't have it right here with me, but for community college, they are considered public funds, and they do have to receive approval in order to use them for scholarships. I could not locate it for the other, and that's why I did request that, and that's why Tamara is looking for it.
Thank you. Representative Probst.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Apologize for being late, and also apologize, I read the report, but you may have discussed this already. There was some talk about the definition of DEI, which I took to mean not what we hyperbolically talk about, but more of a kind of comprehensive, what is going to help a student be successful if they, at all. So when we look at this, when we defined, for the purposes of this DEI, we were talking about anything from race to income levels to disability to, I think I saw a line about neurodivergent. So when we talk about things like food pantries and whatever, the DEI definition is quite broad, isn't it?
There is no defined, view of what DEI is. It's not in statute. It's not from the Board of Regents. The universities each kind of gave us their own view of what it is. So it is not defined. If you talk to 100 people and ask them what DEI is, you'll probably get 100 different responses. Based on what the universities told us and what they reported to us in terms of their services, it is very broad and is very much in the eye of the beholder.
Representative Probst.
Thank you. And well, I guess I'll make a point and then I'll follow with a question. Despite that broad definition, it was a relatively, I think, 1 to 2% of the overall budget of these schools, right? It was a very small amount.
We asked the universities to report to us based on a consistent definition. So it's in the report, we see if any money that's related to an activity that supports students who don't have the same opportunities to succeed as others. That was the definition. Universities reported based on their interpretation of that definition. And so from that perspective, it was consistent, but it is a reasonably broad definition, but it's consistent with the things we heard from the universities in terms of how they view DEI. But it is broad.
And then one more, if I can. One of the concerns I had when this audit was brought to us is that it would be very, very difficult to identify the amount of time individuals in the universities were spending time on DEI. And my suspicion at the time was that we would have a lot of fractional analysis, that maybe this person spends 1% of their time, this person spends 10%, and I thought it would be very difficult to calculate. Can you talk a little bit about that process of trying to, I guess, collate all that information into coming up with a number?
Yes, what we asked the universities to do was to report kind of the DEI-related FTE. So, if a person was, say, a full-time staff, so they're a 1 FTE, but they only spend 20% of their time on DEI-related activities. We asked the universities to identify that. We worked with them a little bit in a few cases to get the numbers to make, for them to make sense and to be some logical consistency in them, but it was largely reported from the universities. And what we did find was that it's a lot of fragments. There are some full-time FTE people in there, things like directors of DEI offices or diversity inclusion offices. I think belonging and inclusion was a pretty common title that we saw, and that might be a full FTE. But certainly many people were just a portion, sometimes down to 0.01% of their time was spent on DEI.
Senator Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kind of a two-pronged question. Do we know what year this DEI paradigm came into existence in the universities, and are there federal dollars that either subsidize or encourage this type of activity at the universities?
We didn't look at anything but this year. So talking to universities and things, I think there are some things that would maybe fall under the umbrella of DEI that are relatively new, and there are many activities that have been around a long time. So I think it would be a mix, even though we didn't look specifically. In terms of federal funds, we just didn't look at federal funds at all. We really stayed narrow and looked at state funding.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Reddy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is my first time looking at it in the past few minutes. I'm here substituting for Senator Ware. But I wanted to say some of this also falls probably under the umbrella of differentiated instruction. When, as a school teacher, you're trying to make sure, as you give access to a lot of students, whether it's a visual or if you need an interpreter or whether you need sign language, sound, sight, whatever it might be. So I think DEI has been around for a long time. So I think when they provided this, I can understand why there was such a broad definition, because when you're trying to meet those outcomes, you have to give them multiple ways, since they're paying tuition, to meet the outcomes. Even under that definition, I would imagine every single student falls in that category somewhere along the line, somewhere in the spectrum. But the foreign piece of this here, I wanted to know specifically to these countries, is there anything about if there were undergraduate students or graduate students? I ask that because I know a lot of science departments and such reach out because there isn't that type of a student to fit a certain research project they're looking at.
No, we didn't make any distinction. We just had them report to us all money from foreign sources, including tuition and fees. We did not have them distinguish between graduate and undergraduate. I would like to clarify one thing, though. In this number, this 45 million with 9 million of it being state funding, we stayed out of the classroom. So if a teacher teaches a DEI-related course, diversity and culture or something like that, we did not include that here. Now, if that professor then also sat on, say, a DEI-related committee, then we caught that little percentage of it. We did ask them to report, and if there was money associated with it, we would have caught that as well. But we stayed out of the classroom otherwise. So we don't have a lot of full-time professors in here. We have little fragments of professors because they're doing other things, but we did steer clear of being in the classroom, trying to capture these expenditures.
Any further questions? Thank you very much, Heidi. We'll bring up Mr. Flanders to answer any questions. Blake, would you stand for questions?
Sure. Hello, Blake Flanders. I'm President and CEO of the Board of Regents, and if you have any questions, I'd take them at that time.
Senator Thompson.
Yeah, thank you, Blake. Same question I had for the auditor. Are there federal dollars that come in that encourage or subsidize DEI spending in the universities?
So I would expect that answer to be yes, but what I want to do is I want to go back and research that.
Okay.
And just look at that.
I'd appreciate that. And also kind of a timeline of when it was implemented first in the university system and how the spending has grown. I'd be interested in that.
Okay, and on the growth question, if 97% or there was some category was salary, so it will grow.
Right.
As salaries increase, but we'll get you that answer.
I guess what I'm saying, you know, are we hiring more people in that category? You know, and if it's 97% salary, you're only talking about a 3% margin there for other type services. You know, has that changed? Any kind of information on the trends would be very interesting. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Probst.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Thompson, you've asked kind of the timeline on DEI, and I guess I feel that I at least want to acknowledge. I think DEI is what we call it today. It's the label that we've put on it, but I would argue that it's been an organic growing thing over time. I mean, I was thinking about the passage of the ADA. That anytime then at that point, if a college then incorporates any accessibility options into its campus, that would be, under this broad definition, part of DEI. We may not have labeled it such in the 80s, but it would have been an organic outreach of that. I think over the years, I think anything at a university, under my understanding, anything a university has done to facilitate success for anything other than what we traditionally think of as a college-bound student, that would fall under this very broad definition of DEI. So I think we're looking for like a demarcation of when this began, and I would argue that it's more of an organic outcropping of changes in our culture.
Senator,
Well, yes, but by the same token, I think this DEI acronym or whatever started being used for a specific reason some years ago. And it may not be as far back as we think, and I don't know that it's necessarily as broad and encompassing as it's intended. I don't know how to describe what I'm trying to say here, but I know they've hired specific officers under DEI, or some schools have, under the DEI umbrella. And so I would like to know when it changed and specifics of who we are hiring and for what reasons. The whole point of this is, this seems to be, there was no definition. It seems to be very ambiguous. And why are we spending this money and for what purposes and how do you track it, at least from a state funding standpoint? Are we getting our money's worth? And how do you, this seems to be the paradigm right now. That's kind of what I'm looking for here, I think, if that makes sense. Thank you.
yes, and I think he'll provide the information for us, hopefully. Sure.
Just a comment, if I might. The auditors did a great job with this audit, digging into all these data. I mean, but typically, we've had, when an audit occurs, we've had the legislative post-audit say, here is our definition. And so that was a little bit different this time, where that definition really wasn't, the definition was very broad.
So I think Heidi would like to respond to that. And at least I welcome Heidi to respond to that. How's that?
I agree that the definition is broad, but we did provide it in advance. And so the universities did have it in advance, and they used it to think about how they reported expenditures to us. It's broad because there's no agreement. Talk to different people, they'll all give you different answers. We tried to narrow it down to things that we heard from the universities. So we didn't conjure it out of thin air or anything. We talked to the universities first, talked to them about how they viewed this, and then came up with something that we could give to all the universities so that they could provide something to us that was consistent. Just because of the nature of the question, it is a little bit broad, but they did receive it in advance, and they did, it would have informed what they reported. So.
Okay, thank you. Representative Probst has a question, I think, for you, Heidi.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I read that the definition that we used was consistent with the definition that was used a previous year, a previous session, when we asked for, the legislature or the Legislative Research Department asked for basically this same information. Is that right?
Last February, Legislative Research did request some similar information. My understanding is that they did not provide a definition, and they certainly wouldn't have used the definition we used because we created it for this audit. So it would not have been available to them last year. But they did ask the universities for DEI, as well as, I believe, foreign contribution information. I believe there was some frustration with what was received, and that inevitably resulted in this audit.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is for Blake. Hello, Blake. Okay. So I think that the inclusive and safe environment was the goal for DEI, and to try and create more of an even playing field for all of our students. And in the recent months with different events going around, happening across the country, there have been concerns about unequal treatment of students. And I think that's the opposite of what DEI aims to do in its most altruistic sense. And I'm going to give you a quote from a school in Kansas. And I want to ask you if you believe that that creates a more inclusive and equalizing environment for all students, or if it actually does the opposite, okay? So this is one of our schools, and it says, it's discussing language and slurs, and it says, shall not be used against a protected class. Federal, state, can lead to a reprimand, a demotion, a suspension, or a minor infraction, but it only mentions a protected class. I'm not sure if the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is trying to create protected classes, or if they're just trying to eliminate discrimination based on color, race, religion, ethnicity. So anyway, so my question is this statement at one of our schools creating a distinction between students and creating a divide?
I'm not sure exactly what the,
I can restate it.
whether that's statement, so if someone uses a racial slur or speaks against the Jewish community, I would, yes, there.
Well, the statement
yes,
says.
That wouldn't create an inclusive environment.
Okay, well, the statement says they cannot make such statements or slurs against a protected class. I would hope we wouldn't want that for any of our students. So my question is what is a protected class, number one, and is that consistent with DEI, policy, and is that good for our universities if our only purpose is for a protected class and other students don't have that same protection? Because I'm reading this, that if you're a protected class, and it doesn't define who.
Okay, so I understand now.
Okay.
I would hope that we'd have that for all students. So I think that I think we shouldn't have slurs against protected classes, nor do I think we should have it against about any student. Having said that, there's probably some federal law tied to that, and I'm not going to be the expert on that, and so I can research that, but I would imagine that there is federal guidelines attached to protected classes.
And I would ask Tamara to help us on that too, if there's a definition in federal or state law on protected class, and Representative Williams.
Yeah, and the only thing I was going to say is ultimately DEI has high standards or values to create this platform of equity and inclusion. But my question, and I think the overall concern, is it doing that? Or are some students in our university system feeling opposite of what it's aiming to do? And I would challenge our universities to reach out to all students and ensure that they all feel equally valuable, and that we're not just looking at one particular group, but we're looking at all students, because all students are vulnerable at any given time. Thank you.
Representative Probst.
Thank you for the indulgence, Madam Chair. I will eagerly await the staff's definition on this, but my suspicion on that is that there is a distinction between creating an environment in which all people feel welcome and the protected class. And we do have an attorney on this, that is a federal definition. I mean, that's a protected class is a list of people who are in a protected class. And my guess is, I don't know the full statement, but my guess is that is a kind of legal definition that's being put out there that is standard boilerplate language that says we don't tolerate this because it creates a legal liability for the university if they don't have that language. I think that's one distinction between a federal definition of a protected class, and I don't think that is the same thing as saying we want everybody to feel welcome and included. I think those are two different things. We don't have, and maybe we should have a statement that says we want everybody to feel welcome, but there is a federal definition on protected class.
Senator Reddy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is in reference to a previous question asked by Senator Thompson. I think it was him who asked about what are we getting from them? What are we getting from the DI process? Kind of like what is the return on investment and all of these things. I think it would be good, I don't know how this committee works, if there are outcomes, and how do you measure those outcomes? Is it by how many people graduate? What kind of jobs did they get? Where did they end up? And I think those types of outcomes might show if this is being effective or not, because ultimately the university is there to teach you to critically think and assess beyond your own space. But also what we want, I suppose, as funds are being used, where are all of these students ending up? And I think that's the only way to measure progress is positive outcomes and maybe negative outcomes from it. So I think that's a measurement tool that we can say, yes, it's working. Our state funds are being utilized well because now we have created a workforce that can work in a variety of spaces, whether it's in Kansas or out of Kansas, whatever that might be. So I just wanted to find a metric on how to measure those outcomes. Thank you.
Do you want to respond to that? Or I know there's legislation that's been passed on that that's fine. It was more of a statement than a question.
We have a host of metrics.
You do, I know you do. You have a website, there's been legislation that's been passed addressing that, so. I'm sorry, did you ask a question? I'm sorry.
No, Senator. I thought there was a question posed by Senator Thompson about how effective these were. That's what I was trying to look at, metrics to look at. You may already have it, but I'm saying that's one way to look at them. Thank you.
Yes, Representative Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I was just Googling protected class, and what I came across is the Civil Rights Act of 1964. I think it's a little bit expanded. It says race, age, color, religion, sex, national origin or ancestry, disability, citizenship, veteran status, which is an expansion, so I'm not exactly sure the full extent of that. But bottom line, that's everybody. But what I read was a statement that feels exclusive. So just maybe that's just the way that it's perceived, but the way I read this, protected class could include every single person in every single university.
Thank you. Did you want to respond or? Okay, no other statement. That's fine. I just was asking. I was giving you the opportunity. No problem. Are there any other questions for Dr. Flanders? Seeing none, thank you very much. Thank you for being here. I would like to thank Representative Howe for bringing this to our attention and requesting the audit, so thank you. Committee, next item on the agenda is the consent calendar. First, I would like to welcome Senator Reddy. She was with us last time, and I think there was some confusion, probably on my part, and I apologize. Anybody that was not in a previous meeting, if they want to exclude themselves, it is always an option to exclude yourself from a vote or have a recorded vote. I just want to make that clear for the committee. I would never block anyone from voting. If anybody felt like they are, please let me know, because I would never do that. But thank you, committee, and thank you, Kristen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So on today's consent calendar, there are a few different items. So if you want to turn to tab A in your notebook, that's where you'll find this information. So there are actually two sets of minutes for you all in there. Those are in attachments A and B from the January 31st and February 7th meetings. And then we also have acceptance of the audit that was presented today, the diversity, equity, and inclusion and foreign income at state universities.
And if I may, Kristen, this works a little different than other committees. Since it is on the consent calendar, it is, if there is no objection, that it is assumed it is passed. And if anybody wants to be recused from the vote, they need to let us know that so that we can make that part of the record.
Correct.
So if, on any portion of this. Okay. So committee, is there anybody that would like to be recused? Senator Reddy.
Yes, thank you. Madam Chair, I don't believe I was here on January 31st, so I would like to recuse myself from 1A and be part of the rest of the consent agenda.
Okay, recuse or abstain. Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. Okay. Anyone else? Seeing none, is there any objection on the consent calendar? Seeing none, thank you. Oh, yeah, one more, sorry. Chris, next meeting.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If you'll turn to tab B, that's kind of what's coming down the line. Next meeting is a week from today. That will be the Angel Investor Tax Credit Program, and we'll have some security awareness training for you, the committee. Then we'll give you a break, probably till later, much later in March, towards the end of March. That will be the motor vehicle taxes. And then we're just getting new audits underway since we've been wrapping some up. So Lewisburg School District Limited Scope is underway, TIF Districts is underway, Star Bonds is underway, and the Kansas Housing Resources is coming up soon, as is TANF. So there'll be more coming, but so a meeting next week and then a couple weeks of a break.
Thank you, Chris. And we're getting closer to the date where we start considering audits. So I would put that on the committee's, bring that to your attention also.
Yes, please be thinking of yourselves if you have audit topics and pass the word to your colleagues. Now is the time. We usually meet, it's usually in late April. So we've got some time, but let's get them going.
So Chris, I do have a logistical, if for some reason the legislature would adjourn early as they did last year, would that impact our schedule for looking at audits?
No, we'll schedule the meeting when we're sure you're going to be here.
Thank you. Committee, any other business? Seeing none, we're adjourned. Thank you.